You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Let's Get Surety. We're recording today from our home recording studios again, and just wanted to share some more information with everyone around electronic bonding, which is something I think everyone's interested in right now. Today I've got with me co-host Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP.
Great to be on the program again, Kat. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you with me, Mark. And then also our guest today is Corban Enns from Arthur J. Gallagher. Hey Corban,
Kat.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much. Great to be on with you today.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Arthur J. Gallagher?
Yeah, you bet. So I entered into the surety industry by choice, probably one of the few out there that didn't fall into it one way or another. And for about the last 15 years or so, had built an agency that specialized in a lot of transactional commercial surety. We joined forces with Gallagher here this last year and have continued to work under their guidance as a new merger partner and have created some unique software to help deploy online transactional surety across the United States. So it's been quite a ride.
So you sound like the person we should definitely be talking to about electronic bonding.
I definitely like the technology side of things and also finding out ways to adhere some of that technology to some great product lines within the surety industry. So.
Well, this is about the best time we could have this discussion with, all the developments that have occurred with the coronavirus crisis and employers moving their workforces home, working remotely from home. Certainly, the idea of having electronic bonding systems is coming to the forefront. And it seems maybe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Corban, that on the commercial surety side, because it's more transactional, things have we're a little bit more innovative going in that direction than, say, the contract surety side. Would you say that's a true statement?
Yeah, Mark, I would agree with that. I think that because of the number of transactional instances where a commercial surety obligation is transmitted from party to party, I think numerically they're quite a bit higher than in the contract side of things. And then also because so many of the bond penalties are a little bit more innocuous, or the overall obligation is one more of compliance than maybe a true financial guarantee in nature. There's been more opportunities and probably a little bit more openness for various owners or obligees to consider different ways of transmitting a very traditional product line. And so you've seen obligee after obligee across the United States kind of explore different methodologies as technology has made itself more available to first distribute or to receive, various electronic forms of a surety product line. So I would agree.
So you've actually been involved in the development of some of these systems, which meant that you had to address a lot of the concerns and some of the obstacles and kind of blazing that path. Do you care to go into a little bit of detail about that?
Yeah, so again, our office, our branch of Gallagher now, we've got a number of licensed and permit bonds across the nation. Some are a little bit more concentrated in certain segments. So a number of contractor licensed bonds may be in Oregon, or court bonds in the Oregon sector as well. California contractor licensed bonds. So other obligations where obligees have been more favorable for some kind of a mechanism of an electronic transfer of that surety guarantee. In other situations, with the advent of the collapse in 2008, 2009 within the mortgage industry, the SAFE Act came about, and a method to try and protect consumers and the mortgage industry at large. And part of that SAFE Act was the creation of the NMLS. It was the nationwide mortgage licensing system, now called the nationwide multi-state licensing system, as the service scope of that repository has expanded beyond just mortgage. And the NMLS was kind of the first federal product with multiple obligees participating in a single repository that helped to facilitate an electronic surety bond. So they called it the ESB. And for the last 8 or 9 years, I think it was beginning in 2011 or 2012, I started to try and connect with the parties at NMLS to discuss with them some of the benefits of an electronic surety bond filing system.
So, what was convincing to them to want to move in this direction?
There's kind of a funny story on that one, Mark. A number of years ago, earlier on, when we were talking about this idea of electronic surety bonds, I was at the NMLS conference, and the room was full of regulators and licensees. And in advance for the conversation during that session, I had printed out 4 different surety bonds from different state agencies. So like a Tennessee bond, a Kentucky loan broker bond, and everything else. And I gave each table I gave them each 4 different bonds. And the challenge was to spot the fraudulent bonds. So each examiner and each licensee, they picked up the bond obligation. Some people, licked their finger and then rubbed the signature to see if it would smear. Others would rub to see if they could actually feel the embossed raised seal from the surety company. Others went, meticulously through the power of attorney that was attached. And we had a number of different responses. Oh, it's definitely got to be the Tennessee bond. That's not a real signature. Or it's definitely the Kentucky bond. The seal looks like it's a little bit off. And the truth of the exercise was that they were all fraudulent bonds. They were with power of attorney that I had downloaded off of Google. They were embossed with a notary stamp from Staples. They were with signatures that didn't actually match the power of attorneys. And there was a whole bunch of information that was all misrepresented, both from the principal side of things, the obligee side of things, and then doctored up in the power of attorney. So here was an exercise that took a very trusted product that everybody thought that they could successfully navigate. And in only a few minutes, it completely rocked their understanding of what made a bond valid. And so as we talked about some different exercises of how they could actually still secure an authentic product that would actually guarantee what it was intended for, we moved through exercises to talk about other instances and their narratives of how they created a safe mechanism of deploying surety through different parties in a successful manner in a digital format while still keeping the authentic bond in place. So the big concern being, is this bond going to pass if we have a claim? And is the surety company actually going to pay out if it's an electronic bond? And then again, to maybe help to validate some of the concerns about authenticity and what that looks like from a product standpoint. So that was probably the exercise that left most regulators and licensees kind of at a pause to now consider maybe a new way of being able to do business.
Wow, what a powerful story!
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're demonstrating that people go with what they know in terms of the comfort level. That doesn't mean that they understand necessarily what that was doing and whether it impacted the legality and enforceability of the bond, which in many instances, as you point out, you don't necessarily have to have it notarized or it doesn't have to be an embossed seal, but people just assume that. So, wow, what an incredible moment you had when you did that. Certainly, that's probably a factor in a lot of public authorities or obligees' minds. You were able to very ably demonstrate that to one group. Have you been able to do that in other contexts with other bond products?
Yeah, so as the ESB began to move through this element of creation, I think some of the acceptance is because of the sophistication of the system itself. And while that's a great success for industry to say, look how we have come together. We have actors on the surety world. We have actors in the state agency regulator world, various obligees across the nation. And we have actors as the licensee or various principals who are now really coming together in a single conference to be able to communicate best practices, to articulate possible concerns, and now to address issues as it relates to the surety product and validating that the product will be authentic or it will be valid, even if it is transmitted or stored in a different or a new fashion. But the promise is still there. And so that was really helpful. And so we as an industry, and I say industry very broad, obligees, principals, surety companies coming together to be able to kind of authenticate a number of processes involved. That's been a multi-year effort. We still don't have 100% adoption from every state agency for every licensed part as it relates to the mortgage industry, but it's getting close. We're more than 50%. There's been additional adoption each and every year as we roll out. I think that for the obligees that are not part of a system as complicated of the NMLS, it's again the question of electronic bonds and maybe what that means. And generally, if there's any kind of a reluctance for an obligee to consider accepting a digital product, you kind of have to ask the why. So what is the concern? Is it that the bond is not valid and it's a truly fraudulent bond form? And if that's the case, well, then who actually created the fraudulent document? Is it like an untrustworthy agent, or was it an unauthorized bond by the surety company? Or is it a actual principal who's, taken a copy of the license and permit bond and ripped off a POA and now tried to give a $5 million bid bond for something that they weren't truly approved for? So I think if you can understand the perspective of the obligee or the owner, and then kind of, again, address with specificity maybe concerns that they would have. So ways that you might mitigate a fraudulent bond. Maybe there's like a bond validation phone number that the obligee could go ahead and call and then authenticate that this is an actual bond that has been approved by the surety company, or it's for the said bond penalty that's on the documents themselves. But I think until we understand the narrative or concerns of the obligee, it's tough to be able to address those and to create a new narrative, reframing their concerns in a way that's successful. But you could point to ICC freight broker bonds that are out there and the electronic transmission by surety companies and how those are digitally filed. You could point to customs, where there is hundreds of millions of dollars of aggregate liability that are in electronic customs bonds. Or you could point to the California Construction Contractors Board, where there's more than there's I think about 250,000, give or take, licensed contractors in California, and surety companies have the ability to file electronic bonds directly with the obligee. So there's definitely instances where both volume or scope of liability is appropriately addressed through the transmission of a surety bond through an electronic mechanism. And so again, if we can understand the concern, we can speak to specificity about that concern and then create that narrative or show stories of success in other instances.
It seems like a lot of the obligees, once they get past maybe the hesitancy on in terms of maybe fraud concerns, that they would realize that there's great efficiencies in kind of going in this direction. Do you see some of the early adopters? Was that of great, importance to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's the concern of the product, like you said, and maybe is it an authentic or a fraudulent bond? But then also, it was funny, at the NMLS conference a few years after the fact, there was a state agency, I think it was Wyoming, who had actually converted to an ESB product. And they were really relieved about the efficiencies it would gain to them, and also just the storage of these mechanisms, because the surety bond is sometimes the backstop to protect the consumer in these license obligations. And so shortly after the state agency had converted to electronic surety bonds, they had a fire in their office. And I spoke to the examiner after the fact, and her first response was, "Oh my God, my bonds." And so the concern was, is the fireproof file cabinet really going to be fireproof long enough to protect all of those original obligations? And she was at peace because she knew that most of the bonds had all been converted to an electronic fashion ahead of time. So I think that you see efficiencies not only in the delivery or processing of these types of applications or renewal of licenses or some of the mechanisms that accompany the surety product line, but it also has efficiencies as it relates to storage and continuity. So if there is a disaster or something else, or a coronavirus that pops up, where now we're all working from home, how in the world are you going to get your overnight deliveries when your mailroom is shut down? Or how are you going to actually inhibit the transmission of something like COVID through physical means now being transported all over and all throughout the United States, whereas you could receive it in electronic format in 5 minutes from my living room to your living room? And we can now effectually perform the mechanism of the surety product, but just through a delivery mechanism that's something a little bit different.
So it sounds like there are some unfounded fears and some strong case and some strong reasons to go forward in this direction. What are some of the other circumstances on the commercial surety side where you think this really has great applicability? Is it kind of universal, or do you see some particular areas that really would lend themselves to going more on an electronic system?
I think that the commercial portfolio, and this is probably said about the entire insurance portfolio, but if you look at insurance, there's 30,000, 40,000 independent agents across the United States delivering these products to consumers and small businesses everywhere, right? If you then narrow it down to the niche market of surety, the same thing can be said about contract or the commercial application of it. I think that there's not been a lot of opportunities for a federal registry or repository, such as the NMLS, to exist in the past. And it took the SAFE Act being enacted at the federal level and the devastation that the implosion happened in 08 and 09 as a result of this to actually be created. But now that there is a forum and a mechanism that brings all parties together, licensees and principals are now coming together. They're working in the same system with the obligees, and they're working in the same system with the surety companies. There's a new era of how some of these things can be conducted. Now, when NMLS first came about, it was really problematic because some smaller agencies had a hard time with navigating this network and figuring out how to actually be involved in this new system. It had a learning curve established with it, and a lot of the traditional ways of how we did the business are no longer there. It also evened the playing field out a little bit. So, one of the things that we looked at in our office was some proprietary knowledge of just a whole bunch of different bond forms and obligations. And now those are now at an even playing field where you can simply have a login in NMLS, or a carrier might be able to do this on your behalf, and all these obligations are issued electronically. So I think at the initial, there is a concern potentially about the product line and smaller businesses maybe not being able to pivot or to be successful in this field as well. And that's probably a hesitation for a lot of the commercial obligations. So many commercial bonds are issued to small businesses across the United States, and many of those are probably serviced by smaller independent agents that would not have the wherewithal or the systems or technology to really have an e-commerce type of a platform for this. But I think go ahead.
Well, so clearly education's important, and it sounds like you undertook that within your own agency. Are there other avenues? Is that something that an NASBP or individual surety companies could assist with in terms of educating people to move in this direction?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I completely agree with that. And I think that the NASBP has done a very good job of collecting industry information, distilling it down into applicable studies or white papers for the larger agency base, and helping to educate them about what changes are coming, as well as those changes that have been enacted and ways that they can successfully navigate those.
Oh, that's great. Well, obviously, kind of on the contract surety side, things may not be as far ahead, and yet the needs are just as pressing. Do you have some advice on folks on that side of the business on how they might go about kind of advocating for electronic bonding, or at least acceptance of electronic signatures and seals?
Yeah, I think that this COVID-19 is a really an important milestone for our industry, because it potentially for the first time might bring about some of these potential changes. So again, going back to the earlier comment about the concern and the narrative of an obligee or an owner, what is the concern? So if all bidders had valid bonds that could be delivered in a digital platform, and it wasn't to the advantage of one bidder versus another, would it then be an acceptable methodology? And so I think that we've seen a number of surety companies now reaching out and empowering their agents with addendums to the power of attorneys to enable an obligee to consider a digital seal is equivalent to a raised seal. And so I think that, again, if we can transition that even further from an electronic seal to now becoming an electronic signature, and that we can successfully navigate and communicate the authenticity of the object, then it can be very empowering. So if we're trying to empower other contract agencies to be successful with obligees and considering an electronic bond, I think we can point to a number of other areas where that is successfully done, whether it be contract or commercial, and then to better tease out potential concerns they might have, and then reaching out to the industry at large of success stories where those concerns have been successfully mitigated.
Right.
And there might just be more desire in the new remote world we're in now to move in this direction than there had been in the past.
Absolutely. Kat, so if we're in lockdown or if we're at a shelter-at-home order for a couple of weeks, maybe it doesn't actually really impact the change that much. But if you've now forecast and you say, okay, well, in Oregon, what if we're at shelter-at-home for 5 weeks? Can we really push pause on business for 5 weeks? And if we don't want to simply halt business because we can't get around how to overcome the obstacle of delivery of a product line, that's a real shame. I think that we can hit the objective of providing a surety product, guaranteeing the contractor for the work and performance that's being done, and at the same time doing so in such a way that facilitates the current economy and the current health needs of our community members out there.
Wow. I mean, certainly this is as timely as it comes. Some really compelling information you've imparted. Really appreciate your presence here today, Corban. And we look forward to making headway on this issue.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much, Kat. Thanks so much, Mark, for having me over today. I appreciate it.
Great talking with you about electronic bonding.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.